Wow, it's amazing. I pray and I open up, and somehow there's an additional five. It's magic. Do you want to pray again? Yeah, yeah, that's good, Tim. We're going to take a look at the book of Ruth, and I'm going to here's a handout. Thane, could you hand this to the Horners? Y'all might have to pass it around. First, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the book of Ruth that comes from its placement. And I'm taking this from Dempster's book, Dominion and Dynasty. And he especially is looking at the message of the Old Testament as it is given to us in the order of the Hebrew Bible. And he makes this observation about the placement in the book of Ruth, which he calls the little book of David. In our Bibles, we find it before Samuel and after the book of Judges. And that's helpful because we'll find out in verse 1 of Ruth, chapter 1, that the people that we're going to learn from and about these events, these people, this took place in the days when the judges judged Israel, verse 1. And so we know the time of Elimelech and what took place in his household, but it seems that there's no clear evidence in the text of Ruth itself, but its placement before Samuel may also hint at traditionally Jewish scholarship has viewed, or Jewish tradition has viewed, that Samuel is the author of Ruth. It seems totally possible that could be the case. There's just not clear evidence from the text itself that that is certain, but at least that's helpful for understanding why it is that we might find Ruth in the place that we have it in our Bibles. But in the Hebrew Bible, and you see this chart that's given to you, we're looking at the first half of the writings right now, and what we find is that the prophets were poetry, and then immediately following the prophets, we have this bit of narrative, and then we're going to go into the section that goes from Psalms to Lamentations, and it's all poetry. And one of the things that is true in the Old Testament is that when you have a long section of poetry, generally the whole book would be poetic, and then you have a section of prose or narrative, you need to make sure that you pay attention to that prose. Likewise, say when you're reading in the first 5 books of the Old Testament, when you have lots of narrative and then all of a sudden you have a section of poetry, you need to really pay attention to that poetry. So the same applies when we see that the Hebrew Bible will also purposefully select a book, place it in a certain order within those books, and it may reveal something to us. Here's one of the things that when we ended the book of the 12, what do we end with? What is the situation of Israel at the end of the book of the 12? Are they in the land or out of the land? Some are in the land. So there is some returned exiles from Babylonian captivity, and they have re-entered the land. The temple has been rebuilt, though it is not what it used to be. The walls have been reconstructed. But is there a Davidic king sitting on the throne in Jerusalem? There is not. However, is one alive? Jehoiachin is alive, and he has been exalted by the Babylonian king. And so there is this active hope that there is a Davidic son who is alive. And then we would go to the narrative of Ruth, and we might be able to sort of have these questions. Maybe this is the reason that Ruth is placed where it is, and that is, how should we understand or think about no son of David being on the throne in Jerusalem? How might we be able to think about, even if it were when they were in captivity, or all of Israel had not returned to the land. To frame it another way, when God has made, because at this point in our reading of the New Testament, what are some of the covenant promises that we know? And we'll begin. What do we know is going to come from a woman because of what God promised in Genesis chapter 3, verse 15? The serpent crusher is going to come from woman. It's going to be seed of the woman, a son. And we've seen as we've moved forward in the covenant that God made with Abraham, what also is the expectation of these covenant promises. Abraham's people are going to be blessed, and we've seen that that is a particular land. They know what that land is. We are also to see, is it just Abraham's descendants who are going to be blessed in the covenant God made with Abraham? No, the nations are going to be blessed, and we have seen that it's going to be a blessing that is going to come through a seed or a son of Abraham. And so that gives us expectations that we have need of the land and we have need of the seed. And when you do not have all the people in the land, the question is, well, I cannot understand how the land is going to be given. How can God fulfill his promises when there's no Davidic son? Because if we go back to 2 Samuel chapter 7, which at this point in the Hebrew Bible we would have read, we would have the expectation of there's going to be a son of David who will sit on the throne for how long? Forever. And there's not even a Davidic son on the throne now. We also are able to add to these promises that prophecies were given. And when we come to Genesis 49, verse 10, out of all of Israel's sons, which son is promised to have a descendant who will come forth a king, and the scepter will not part from his hand, and he will be over his brothers as well as over the nations? What tribe? What son of Israel? Judah. And being that we have already met David, we've already seen the end of David in Samuel, we also know where is David's town. What is the town of David? Bethlehem. And then if we even hearken back to that really strange prophecy in Numbers 24, where you had that pagan seer paid off to curse Israel, but in fact he doesn't. He actually blesses Israel 4 times. And in that blessing, he actually declares that from the tribe of Judah, there is going to be this star who will rise, and he will rule over whom? All of the nations, but what nation is especially, because remember who paid him off to curse Israel? What particular nation is highlighted there? Indeed, representative of all the nations, this one from the tribe of Judah, this king from the tribe of Judah will reign over. Moab. All of those get poured into this wonderfully beautiful story, which just by itself is fantastic. I have read that some people suggested that the book of Ruth and the book of Esther were just written for Jewish entertainment. They are entertaining, so I do think we need to acknowledge that. I mean, just look at verse 1. This is the timeless introduction to all great stories. Elizabeth, it starts this way. Now it happened. I mean, like the Princess Bride just picks up with the same kind of, understanding of how the good stories start. Now it happened in the days when the judges judged that there was a famine in the land, and a certain man of Bethlehem in Judah went to sojourn in the fields of Moab with his wife and 2 sons. At this point, I mean, you're thinking, take me along. I'm here for the story. It's a fantastic story. But the story is not only true about these people, it's not only indeed very pleasant to read. If your heart doesn't move in the book of Ruth, you need to check to see if you have a heart. All right. Uh, however, it's meant to teach us something that is incredibly significant. Number one, it's going to help us to understand, how do we understand the whole message of the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, our Old Testament? It's almost like Ruth gives us an ability to have the understanding of the whole Old Testament presented to us in this little story. It also helps us to understand, because here's the question, is as we see where it's placed in the Tanakh, has the line of David ever been exiled before? Has it ever been that in David's line that it seemed impossible for the line to continue and for the land to be given? Ruth is going to alert us. Yes, it has. It has seemed impossible, for there was no seed, and thus there would be no ability for the land to continue. In what we come to find out from this particular man in the tribe of Judah, for the land to continue through the gift of a seed. And then we will also be able to find out that indeed there are people from other nations, even Moab, who David himself triumphs over in military victory, and yet we're going to learn his great grandmother was a Moabite. See, not all Moabites nor Gentiles are going to be outside of God's redemptive blessings in the Messiah as promised to Abraham. Indeed, we're going to able to see in that sense there are Gentiles like Ruth who convert to Yahweh. And they pledge themselves to Yahweh and to his people, and they find themselves under his wings. Ruth will show us, indeed, this is the way the Redeemer will come, and he will also make a bride from Gentiles. So there's incredible richness that explains lots of bigger pictures that we are seeing in the Old Testament, but it also explains something for Christians. Do you have the ability to understand how God is working in all of your circumstances, such that you can right now, in those circumstances, be able to see and explain how they are going to fulfill God's promises? The answer is no, you don't. And for some Christians, and maybe we should say for all Christians at some times in our life, we think that there's something that is unfaithful about God when we can't see how our present circumstances are actually God's faithfulness to accomplish his promises. Well, the book of Ruth will help us to see, no, God is accomplishing his promises in the circumstances of his people, even when those people cannot understand how their circumstances are bringing about the fulfillment of God's promises. Ruth does not know her role in God's redemptive plan. And yet the book of Ruth will tell us the role that God had for her. So already I can overpromise, and thus the book of Ruth will not underdeliver, though this class may underdeliver. So few things that we need to notice, and this makes Ruth, and really it's just true in the Old Testament altogether, as we work through, and I would accent, especially in the order of the Hebrew Bible, themes are being used over and over, but they're being loaded up with more and more significance, more and more theological, redemptive, covenantal weight to them. And so there's a number. I've tried to highlight these already. Bethlehem is important to us if we've read through the Hebrew Bible up to this point, because who comes from Bethlehem? David at this point. And we will see, indeed, that's why we see Jesus as clearly the known fulfillment of the Davidic covenant. We already are able to see that the covenant God made with David in 2 Samuel 7 makes the expectation for the Davidic line to be absolutely crucial to God's redemptive promises. To say it another way, can God keep his promises if the line of David is exterminated? No. So Ruth is coming in the Hebrew Bible long after 2 Samuel 7, but it's sort of like a flashback to the time of the judges, which is before the Davidic covenant, that helps us to understand not only how God has worked in the past, but also how we can see God has especially preserved the Davidic line even before David came into existence. We were able to see something else that's a really loaded understanding of some themes. What is significant in verse 1 when we know that this is a certain man of Bethlehem in Judah, and he has to leave the land because there is a famine? Why do lands have famines? Okay, we've seen that it could be, as we moved into the Mosaic covenant, that it could be their sins. But before that, is there even another reason that we have come to understand? Why are there famines? Okay. All right, from the Bible. There we go. All right. What happened to the land when Adam was cursed? The land was cursed. So, but what's significant is what land is now in a famine? Judah, the land of Israel. Which, what was the land framed as when God promised it, and even when the spies were able to look into it? Was it the type of land that would have a famine? It was really the opposite of that, wasn't it? It's presented like this is sort of a garden-like land where the richness and bounty of God's blessings would be given to God's people, and yet we're able to see that no, there is a famine in this land. And what is the consequence of the curse, this famine in this land, to, in this case, the people of Bethlehem? What is the consequence? What do they have to do? It's right there in verse 1. They had to be sojourners. Is there any significance to being a sojourner thus far in the Hebrew Bible? Yeah, who also was a sojourner? Abraham was a sojourner. His people had to sojourn. There was exile that in that sense sort of was indeed a consequence of sin, but now required God to provide some kind of deliverance. So these, if we are reading the book of Ruth as it's given to us in the order of the Hebrew Bible, these themes are loaded with significance. So when we just get to the end of verse 1, we're already thinking like, I think this book is going to, in one sense, be more than what meets the eye. It's going to be a book kind of like Chronicles of Narnia. Like you read it once and that was entertaining. You read it another time, you're like, whoa, there's some really insightful descriptions there. Like always winter, but with no Christmas. You know, like Ruth is going to be a book like that. You keep going back to it and there'll be some richness that is revealed to us. And so he sojourns with his wife and his two sons in Moab. So when you go into Moab with Elimelech, his wife and their two sons, the curse has not canceled the ability for the land to continue in his line. But when we continue reading verse 2, we're told about their names. Names will be important. Elimelech, and the name of his wife Naomi, and the names of his two sons Mahlon and Chilion, Ephrathites of Bethlehem and Judah. Now they came to the fields of Moab and remained there. Then Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her two sons. Now, we do have to do a little bit of explanation, and when you go over to the next page in your handouts. I'm getting ahead of myself. All right, let me rein in. All right. I think I've answered that page. Go over to page 107. All right, here's where we are. Chapter 1 is exile and sojourn. Exile and sojourn. Chapter 1, Elimelech's house seems to have fallen. When we come to verse 3 and we learn that Elimelech has died, but we therefore need to understand something. And again, you have to think in terms of the covenant promises of land and seed. You must have both. What now is something that we should infer when Naomi's husband dies? This is very, very base. This is very concrete. This is just brass tacks. If a wife has her husband to die, what will she no longer be able to have? She will no longer be able to have children. And in particular, will she be able to have any additional sons? No. Now everything hinges upon two sons. We then go to the next verse, and we are able to see, verse 4, they took for themselves Moabite women as wives. The name of the one was Orpah, and the name of the other Ruth, and they lived there about 10 years. Now, one, taking Moabite wives was forbidden, so this doesn't look like a positive development. And then we see that she's not going to be able to have any other sons, so it now seems like, okay, they've hitched their wagon to these forbidden women from Moab, and 10 years passes. And then look at verse 5. Then both Mahlon and Chilion also died, and the woman was left without her two children and her husband. Now, according to what the text tells us, that the 10 years that they were in Moab, did God give to them any sons? So famine, curse in Judah drives them as sojourners in the land of Moab. And as Naomi is coming back from, or at least at the conclusion of her sojourn in Moab, what has been lost for her? Her lawn. All, in one sense, human means of being able to preserve the line of Elimelech has been removed. She can't have any more sons. Her husband is dead. Her two sons did not have any sons through their Moabite wives. And so, in that sense, when we start in verse 6, we're able to see that when she is returning, verse 6, she arose with her daughters-in-law and returned from the fields of Moab, where she had heard in the fields of Moab, that Yahweh had visited his people to give them food. How's she returning? Is she returning better off than she left? Not at all. The circumstances seem to have removed everything from Naomi, and not just Naomi, everything from the line of Elimelech. The house of Elimelech seems to have fallen. We're going to be told more in chapter 1, coming from her her sojourn as she is returning, that helps us to understand the significance of what has taken place. Verse 7, she's coming from the place where she was. Her two daughters in law, they were with her, and they went on the way to return to the land of Judah. So, starting off, how many of the two daughters are committed to continuing with Naomi to the land, or back to the land of Judah? Two, both of them, Orpah and Ruth. Verse 8, Naomi said to her two daughters, "Go return each of you to your mother's house. May Yahweh show loving kindness with you as you have shown with the dead and with me." So she's blessing them, and this is also, she is freeing them that they have no obligation to stay with her. They need to return to their people. What would their people be? Pagan Moabites. So she is honoring them for their loving kindness. She even prays that Yahweh would show them loving kindness in the way that she has shown it to her. And then verse 9, she says, "May Yahweh grant that you may find rest, each in the house of her husband." Then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voices and wept. So what is that? She's saying goodbye to them. Return, you stay in Moab, and you take for yourself a husband from Moab. The relationship is ending. Naomi is trying to end the relationship between her and these daughters in law, which would ensure what? That there's no way that she could have Elimelech's house continue. Because one of the things that's we may need to keep in mind, and this will come up explicitly and then even referentially to a previous significant similar circumstance, that there was something provided for Israel that Moses commanded them that they could do in Deuteronomy chapter 25 called a Levirate marriage. And again, this relates to the need for the land and the seed to continue for the promises of God to his people to be fulfilled. So if one marries, so if a son marries his wife in Israel and the son dies, then a next of kin could marry the widow, provide a son through her that would count for the son who died. So this was a lawful way that God allowed in Israel for a seed through a Levirate marriage to bring forth a son, and the land would continue according to the deceased man and his son through his widowed, now remarried wife. Make sense? We do not practice this today, but it was clearly lawful and allowed in Israel. Well, if she is saying goodbye to these two daughters in law, what would that cancel out? A Levirate marriage that would provide a son. And so that is what Naomi is doing. Naomi is saying goodbye. She's telling them that they are free. She is blessing them and asking for Yahweh to bless them. Verse 10, they both, so this is both of them, they said to her, "No, but we will return with you to your people." Verse 11, but Naomi said, "Return, my daughters. Why should you go with me? Have I yet sons in my womb that they may be your husbands? Return, my daughters, go, for I am too old to have a husband. If I said I have hope, if I should even have a husband tonight and also bear sons, would you therefore wait until they were grown? Would you therefore refrain from marrying? No, my daughters, it is it is more bitter for me than for you, for the hand of Yahweh has gone forth against me. And they lifted up their voices and they wept again. And Orpah kissed her mother in law, but Ruth clung to her. So here we're able to see just boots on the ground interpretation of her circumstances. If I got married tonight and had a son, it still wouldn't work if you waited for him to get old enough that he could then marry you and for a levirate marriage to produce a son so that our house will continue. Not even that would work, Orpah. Not even that would work, Ruth. As sad as you are, I am more sad. You return. So we see the circumstance. So from exile to sojourn, the curse has now seemed to triumph over Elimelech's house. But there's one who is not going to accept these terms. Verse 16, but Ruth said, Then she said, behold, your sister-in-law has returned to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law. But Ruth said, do not press me to forsake you and turning back from following you. For where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. For your people shall be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. Thus may Yahweh do to me and more, if anything but death separates me and you. What is that? It's like a vow. She is now vowing that Naomi's people are her people, Naomi's God is her God, and the only thing that could separate her from faithfulness to Naomi is death itself. And so 18, Naomi saw that she was determined to go with her, and she said no more to her. Verse 19, then they both went until they came to Bethlehem. Now it happened that when they had come to Bethlehem, all the city stirred because of them, and the women said, is this Naomi? She said to them, do not call me Naomi, call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. See, that's exactly what she said, isn't it, in verse 13? That when she looked at the providences of God and her circumstances, from the famine to the sojourn, to the curse of the death of her husband, to the death of her sons, it was bitterness. Verse 21, she explains, I went out full, but Yahweh has caused me to return empty. Why do you call me Naomi? Yahweh has answered against me, and the Almighty has brought calamity against me. Say, Naomi returned, and with her Ruth the Moabitess, her daughter-in-law, who returned from the fields of Moab. Now they came to Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest. So there's a few things theologically that we do need to just note. There's nothing in the text that says anything about Naomi being theologically in error about attributing her circumstances to Yahweh. What we're going to find out, though, is was she right in saying that they're bitter? At least right now, it seems that indeed they are bitter. But let's pause there for any final conclusions. But I think that indeed Naomi is correct in her worldview that she views God as sovereign over all things. She understands her life to be lived in direct relationship to God's decisions. Nothing is outside of God's hand and what God does, and that includes things that we would call well-being, as well as things that we would say, woe. She also, this is not theologically, but it tells you something about the way Naomi views a Moabite daughter-in-law, Does it seem to be an advantage to her that she has her Moabite daughter-in-law Ruth with her? No, she says she's empty-handed. And in fact, it is not really an advantage to her, so it seems. But now we start in chapter 2, and this is where we will see that poor Ruth and God's gracious providence. The significance you're going to see is Ruth. How does God's providence work through Ruth and Naomi's household? Starting in verse 1, now Naomi had a kinsman of her husband, a mighty man of excellence of the family of Elimelech, whose name is Boaz. Now, we've already learned a little bit through Naomi saying to Orpah and Ruth, even if I had a husband tonight and had a son, it's not possible that you could wait for him, marry him, and give me a son. So already we've had this sort of hint at there was a way that the house of Elimelech could be saved. It would have to be through this kinsman redeemer. When we read verse 1 in chapter 2, what does this begin to heighten our sensitivities for? All right, what are some significant attributes of this kinsman? He is wealthy. He is a mighty man of excellence, and very significantly, who's his family? Elimelech. Elimelech. Now, just think through it. When you just describe someone and you're like, he's wealthy, excellent, and he's from Elimelech's line, who controls those things? God does. God does. So God's providence is now alerted to us. It's the beginning of the barley harvest, and there is this one particular person that we're told here by the author, pay attention. We are now looking for, what does Boaz do? So we see in the first 3 verses the partnership of Ruth and Naomi in poverty. Naomi is guiding Ruth about how did it work for the poor in Israel. One of the things that was required in Mosaic law is that if you farmed your field, that you needed to leave some of your crop in the field so that the poor would be able to come into your field and glean from it. I would suggest that even that is a helpful instruction of what is a better way that you might be able to care lovingly for those who are poor. Is it you give them a handout? No. But is it that you offer them a provision that they can work for? Yes. That is the way it worked in Israel. And so, one of the things verse 2 tells us, Ruth the Moabitess said to Naomi, please let me go into the field and glean among the ears of grain after one whom I may find favor in his eyes. And she said to her, go, my daughter. And so she went. And she came and gleaned in the field after the reapers. So it happened that she happened to come to the portion of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the family of Elimelech. Like we needed it to be restated. But there's a significant phrase here. It's 3 words in verse 2. It so happened. Now that's sort of like a tongue-in-cheek phrase. This is, theologically, we call this providence. But clearly, the author has already alerted us that we're looking for this mighty man of excellence of the family of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. And it just so happens that whose field does Ruth, without knowledge of which field would be Boaz, which field does she so happen to glean from? Boaz's field. Verse 4, now Boaz came from Bethlehem and said to the reapers, May Yahweh be with you. And they said to him, May Yahweh bless you. Then Boaz said to his young man who was in charge of his reapers, whose young woman is this? See, the partnership in poverty, which caused Ruth to go out into the field in order to glean for not only herself, but also for Naomi so that they just might live, now providentially through circumstance puts her in Boaz's field. Boaz is seeing her, and he is inquiring from, in one sense, would say his foreman, who's this young woman? Verse 6, the young man in charge of the reapers replied, She is the young Moabite woman who returned with Naomi from the fields of Moab. So clearly, what does Boaz know about, we'll say, her ethnicity? Is she Jewish? She is not. Verse 7. Verse 7. She said, Please let me glean and gather after the reapers among the sheaves. Thus she came and remained from the morning until now. This is the foreman reporting to Boaz how she got here. And she's been sitting in the house for a little while. Well, verse 8, Boaz now speaks directly to Ruth, which that's a positive sign. Mighty man of excellence who's in the house of Elimelech now speaks directly to the Moabite daughter-in-law, widow of Naomi's son. Have you not heard, my daughter? Do not go to glean in another field. Furthermore, do not go on from this one, but stay here with my young women. Let your eyes be on the field which they reap, and go after them. Indeed, I have commanded the young men not to touch you. And if you are thirsty, go to the water jars and drink from what the young men draw. What is being shown to her? God's providence in her poverty, as she is now partnered with Naomi, is Boaz, this kinsman of Naomi, is now showing her partiality. He's now protecting her. He's now providing for her. In verse, she now responds in such a way that reveals something about her. Verse 10, she fell on her face, bowing to the ground, and said to him, Why have I found favor in your sight that you should take notice of me, though I am a foreigner? What did Ruth know about her position and place in relationship to Boaz, as well as all the others in Bethlehem? She is not equal to them in the way that things were framed. She is not an ethnic descendant from Abraham. She is a foreigner. She is a Gentile. Therefore, what does it show us about the favor of Boaz toward her? Was it merited in any way? None. She is able to see that this is his unmerited favor. Why has he given to her this favor, especially noting her status? In verse 11, Boaz replies to her, All that you have done for your mother-in-law after the death of your husband has been fully told to me, and how you forsook your father and your mother and the land of your birth and came to a people that you did not previously know. May Yahweh repay your work, and may your wages be full from Yahweh, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to seek refuge. What does that reveal about in one sense, the choice that Ruth made to yoke herself to Naomi and to her people and to her God? Now, refuge here physically would refer to sustenance at least, but I don't think that's all. I think this statement is revealing that this is how Gentiles actually could come to Yahweh in a saving relationship. Ruth is an example of a Gentile who converts and is saved. Her life bears the evidence, and it even is extolled by Boaz, who we're already told is a mighty man of excellence. He is able to see her life and the character and its devotion and the way that she is relating to her mother-in-law, and he asks that indeed God of Israel would bless her, the God whom she has come under his wings for refuge. Now, verse 13, Elizabeth, is strangely instructive. Verse 13 is sort of like, maybe it's pretty fast in the pace, but she then says to Boaz, "May I find favor in your eyes, my Lord, for you have comforted me and indeed have spoken to the heart of your servant woman, though I am not like one of your servant women." Again, she notes the distinction between her and the other servant women of Boaz. She is a Moabite, but it also is, in one sense, a statement of finding favor in the eyes of this man.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
It may seem a little silly, but it occurs to me that she must have been an attractive woman. And that would be one of the reasons. I mean, Boaz is checking her out there. He says, "Whose young woman is this?" Why would he say that about her and none of the other women working there? And he starts, he tells the men, "I've commanded the servants not to touch you. Keep your hands off her." Tempted to, but no, she's off limits. I mean, it seems to me that she had some things going for her that we're not talking about here.
So what we have to do is we have to say, does the text tell us that?
And it directly does.
Yeah, so you have to say, we are not told that she was beautiful in appearance, which the Bible doesn't shy away from saying. The Bible, especially the Old Testament, will be very frank, whether it's about a man being handsome or a woman being beautiful in appearance, it'll say it. It doesn't say that. It does say that she is young, and we do have narratives of Boaz observes her, speaks to her. Boaz does commend something about her, and he commends her character. So all I would say, Jerry, is I think we would infer that. We would maybe infer that. Yeah, which means maybe, maybe not. We do not know. But we do find that he commends her faithfulness to her mother-in-law. And he finds that attractive.
Yeah, when you start, you're attracted to a young lady, you find lots of things to compliment her.
Now, this will get into, was Ruth, maybe this is the underlying feature of Jerry's question, was the book of Ruth written so that young men and young women might learn some kind of like courting methodology or even decision making when it comes to choosing a spouse? The answer is no. And I would illustrate of what not to do while at the same time accenting the description that I've given to chapter 2, that is God's gracious providence, with my own life. When I knew no hermeneutics whatsoever, and I was a new Christian. I had been a Christian for maybe 2.5 years. I had been dating Malia for I don't remember how long, but she went to China, and I went to a church in the country of northeastern North Carolina, and I was praying about should I marry Malia, and I was trying to find anything in the Bible that might give me instruction about how would I be able to make such a decision. And when I came to chapter 2 and I read this, we're going to find out that when Naomi at the end of chapter 2 I'm sorry, at the end of chapter 3, she's going to say something to Boaz, say something to Ruth about Boaz. And I read the New King James Version at that time. And the New King James Version translates verse 18 of chapter 3 differently than the way my Legacy Standard translates it. The Legacy says, "For the man will not remain quiet until he has finished the matter today." And the New King James translates it, "He will not rest." And so I read the book of Ruth before I went to bed. And do you know what I did, Elizabeth? I, I didn't sleep that night. I was restless. And do you know what? This is absolutely true. I woke up the next morning and I resolved then and there that I would ask Malia to marry me. And I did it.
And see, she was attractive.
So what is the point? I don't think that the book of Ruth was, as Jerry might be suggesting, written to teach us about how to date or to marry or to decide, like I did, if you don't sleep one night because you are concerned about asking a girl to marry you. But just like with Naomi's circumstances, God's providence indeed unfolds even when we make some maybe less than sound hermeneutical decisions. However, we continue to go, and what happens is she seems to request favor. I think there's some wiggle room in the interpretation. Was this even requesting that Boaz may be her kinsman redeemer? Was she hinting that he had the ability to, as Naomi's kinsman, to redeem them? Maybe that is what the favor is that she is asking that she finds in his eyes. Or maybe that's the continued favor of material support by gleaning in his fields and providing protection. But verse 14 takes it up a notch. Mealtime, Boaz said to her, "Come here, that you may eat of the bread and dip your piece of bread in the vinegar." So she sat beside the reapers, and he served her roasted grain, and she ate and was satisfied and had some left. Providentially, in this day, when she partnered in poverty with Naomi, goes into the field, things really turned. This is God's gracious providence, as it is indeed coming to Naomi, but who is it coming through? Her Moabite daughter-in-law, Ruth. Verse 15, then she rose to glean, and Boaz commanded his young men, saying, "Let her glean even among the sheaves, and do not dishonor her." What translation? She having to do more work or less work because of what Boaz just commanded? Less work. And is she going to get more grain or less grain? More grain. All right, so she asked for favor, and what is he doing? He's showing her favor. God's gracious providence now seems to be unleashed in Ruth's as she is partnered in poverty and loyally serving her mother-in-law. And verse 16 says, "And you shall purposely," this is to his young men, "you shall purposely pull out for her some grain from the bundles and leave it that she may glean, and do not rebuke her." Now, Jerry's thinking it's because she's beautiful.
Yeah.
The more pious, like Daniel, are thinking it's because she's holy. But either way, whatever the motives were, it is because God's gracious providence has turned Boaz, and so he is favoring her. Verse 17, so she gleaned in the field until evening. She beat out what she had gleaned, and it was about an ephah of barley. That's a good day of a poor Moabite daughter-in-law gleaning for herself and her mother-in-law. She took it up, verse 18, and went into the city, that is Bethlehem, and her mother-in-law saw what she had gleaned. She also took it out and gave Naomi what she had left after she was satisfied. Her mother in law then said to her, "Where did you glean today, and where did you work? May he who took notice of you be blessed." So she told her mother in law with whom she had worked and said, "The name of the man with whom I had worked today," and we were alerted this in verse 1, is Boaz. All right. Now, Elizabeth, I mean, this should be made into a movie. Like this, the, when 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 that line is dropped, like there should be like a dramatic, like it would pan in on Naomi's face. She's dealing with the barley, and she's like, well, whose field did you glean in? And then she hears Boaz, and it would pan in on her face, and she'd look up. All things would stop. Verse 20, Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, "May he be blessed of Yahweh, who is not forsaking his loving kindness to the living and to the dead." Then Naomi said to her, "The man is our relative. He is one of our kinsman redeemers."
In the south?
They're in Judah. That is the southern portion of Israel. Then Ruth the Moabitess said, "Furthermore, he said to me, you should stay close to my young men until they have finished all my harvest." Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, "It is good, my daughter-in-law, that you go out with his young women, so that others do not oppress you in another field." So she stayed close by the young women of Boaz in order to glean until the end of the barley harvest and the wheat harvest, and she lived with her mother-in-law. So we go through this season. Her pattern was clearly noted. Boaz's continued favor is noted. And then chapter 3, we now turn to rescue and redemption. And when we talk about rescue and redemption, who are we talking about? Elimelech's house. Then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, "My daughter, shall I not seek a state of rest for you, that it may be well with you? And now is not Boaz our kinsman, with whose young women you were? Behold, he is winnowing barley at the threshing floor tonight." Now, so they've gone through the harvest, they're coming through the end, and this is where you may know that with certain grains they would throw it up into the air, and the weight of the seed would fall, but the chaff was lighter, more surface area, and so the wind would blow it away, and it was a way that they were able to separate the seed from the husk. And so this is where the men would be working. It would be a central location, and so Naomi is now giving instructions. Verse 3. So you shall wash yourself and anoint yourself and put on your best clothes. So since Jerry is looking for a manual for dating, is it all right for you to put a little paint on the barn from time to time? Naomi sure thought it would be good for Ruth to put a little paint on the barn. All right. So Elizabeth, that's what Mr. Miller is wanting you to pick up from what Ruth is laying down. You might need to talk to your mom about that, but that's what Naomi tells Ruth to do. "And then you shall," continuing in verse 3, "you shall go down to the threshing floor, but do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. Let it be that when he lies down, you shall know the place where he lies, and you shall go and uncover his feet and lie down, and then he will tell you what you shall do." And she said to her, "All that you say, I will do." Now, clearly, was Ruth an honorable and obedient daughter? Yes. Yes. She's trusting her mother-in-law. She's doing what her mother-in-law says. And verse 6, so she went down to the threshing floor and did according to all that her mother-in-law had commanded her. And verse 7, Boaz ate and drank, and his heart was merry. Don't study the Hebrew about that. Tim, don't study the Hebrew. All right, that's Bob Jones does not want you to do Hebrew exegesis right there. And he went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain, and she came secretly and uncovered his feet and laid down. Now, there is debate here about what exactly is being described. And since this is a class, I'll alert you to uh, some of the interpretations. Some of the interpretations make these actions to be something like a sexual advance. And so it seems that there's at least reasons that that might be possible. I think as we read further, I'm going to reject that. But I think what is included in this is that what she was clearly communicating to Boaz is that he understood that she was communicating to him that she was wanting to become his wife. So I don't think that any sexual immorality was accomplished here, because she is going to be honored, not dishonored from it. But that there are some reasons why people make that interpretation. I think that she was communicating to him very, very clearly that she wanted to be his wife. It did include her physical presentation. It did include why she uncovered his feet and laid down. So it was a communication of, we'll say, sexual elements to the nature of the relationship that she was suggesting to him. But I'm going to not go as far as to say that an immoral relationship took place. Verse 8 continues, it happened that in the middle of the night that the man, that is Boaz, was startled and bent forward, and behold, a woman was lying at his feet. And he said, who are you? And she answered, I am Ruth, your maidservant. So spread your wing over your maidservant, for you are a kinsman redeemer. It's a very direct invitation or request for him to become her husband. So she is asking, in all that would be involved in her becoming his wife, she is presenting herself and explicitly making this request. Verse 10, then he said, may you be blessed of Yahweh, my daughter. You have shown your loving kindness to be better than the first by not going after the young men, whether poor or rich. So he again commends her character. And so it seems that she wasn't seeking to be immoral with young men. This may, Jerry, also infer that Boaz was not the youngest lad among the mix, but she went for a more noble, stately man and made this invitation or request to him. He commends her for that part of her decision. Verse 11, so now, my daughter, do not fear. All that you say, I will do for you. So he gives his word. He will seek to be her kinsman redeemer. For all my people within the gates of the city know that you are a woman of excellence. Now, this is a little strange. And other people suggest the order of this in some arrangements is that this is a book that is illustrating a Proverbs 31 woman. And this actually is the only place outside of Proverbs 31 that a woman actually is called the excellent wife. And that is what Boaz calls her. Verse 12, but now it is true, I am a kinsman redeemer. However, there is a kinsman redeemer closer than I. Stay this night, and it will be in the morning that if he will redeem you, good, let him redeem you. But if he does not desire to redeem you, then I will redeem you as Yahweh lives. Lie down until morning. So she lay at his feet until morning and rose before one could recognize another. And he said, let it not be known that the woman came to the threshing floor. Now, you can see maybe some of the elements why people think that maybe impropriety took place. And they say that because of the secretive element of her entrance in and then exit from. I would suggest this, it is because she was wanting Boaz to be the kinsman redeemer. See, there was another man in line. And so she was requesting Boaz to be the kinsman redeemer. And thus, that the initiation is not to be understood. She was very clear, explicit, and forward with the request, but there is another. There is another. So, verse 15, he said, "Give me the cloak that is on you and hold it." So she held it, and he measured 6 measures of barley and placed it on her. Then she went into the city. Then she came to her mother in law, and she said, "How did it go, my daughter?" And she told her all that the man had done for her. She said, "These 6 measures of barley he gave to me, for he said, 'Do not go to your mother in law empty.'" Then she said, "Sit then, my daughter, until you know how the matter falls into place, for the man will not remain quiet until he has finished the matter today." Right? That's not instruction for sleepless nights, being God's son, for you to ask a lass to become your wife. It is going to say what happens next. But here, clearly, there is a commitment that Boaz has made. He will rescue the line of Elimelech by marrying Ruth. But something has to be done, and that's what he has to finish today. Chapter 4 then now tells us what I'm calling redemption consummated. Boaz went to the gate and sat down there, and behold, the kinsman redeemer of whom Boaz spoke was passing by. So he said, "Turn aside, my fellow, sit down here." And he turned aside and sat down. Then he took 10 men of the elders of the city and said, "Sit down here." So they sat down. Then he said to the kinsman redeemer, "Naomi, who has come back from the fields of Moab, has to sell the portion of the field which belonged to our brother Elimelech. So I thought to uncover this matter in your hearing, saying, 'Acquire it before those who are sitting here and before the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, redeem it. But if no one redeems it, tell me that I may know, for there is no one but you to redeem it, and I am after you.' And he said, 'I will redeem it.' Then Boaz said, 'On the day you require the field from the hand of Naomi, you must also require Ruth the Moabitess, the widow of the one who had died, in order to raise up the name of the one who had died on behalf of his inheritance.'" That's the Levirate duty. Verse 6, how does he respond to this? So the kinsman redeemer said, "I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I ruin my own inheritance. You redeem my right of redemption for yourself, for I cannot redeem it." That was a game changer for him. Verse 7, now this was the custom in the former times in Israel concerning the right of redemption in the exchange of land to establish any matter. A man removed his sandal and gave it to another, and this was the manner of attestation in Israel. So the kinsman redeemer said to Boaz, "Acquire this for yourself," and he removed his sandal. Then Boaz said to the elders and to all the people, "You are witnesses today that I've acquired all that belonged to Elimelech and all that belonged to Chilion and Mahlon from the hand of Naomi. And also I have acquired Ruth, the Moabitess, the widow of Mahlon, to be my wife, in order to raise up the name of the one who had died on behalf of his inheritance, so that the name of the one who had died will not be cut off from his brothers or from the gate of his birth. You are witnesses today." So he went public. He made it objective. There were witnesses. And so, according to all of the custom, these things were done, and redemption of the house of Elimelech was consummated by Boaz in the gates of Bethlehem. But with it, it required that Ruth become his wife. Now, what this means is now there is life and land, or at least the hope of life, and now the preservation of land for the house of Elimelech. But verse 11, the people of Bethlehem, they respond, those who were in the gate and the elders, and they said, "We are witnesses. May Yahweh grant the woman who is coming into your home to be like Rachel and Leah." Now, stop there. They're talking about a Moabite. And then notice what is next. This phrase is is potentially significant with more than the obvious meaning. Both of whom built the house of Israel. And so you shall achieve excellence and epaphra, and shall proclaim your name in Bethlehem. Moreover, may your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah, that through the seed which Yahweh will grant you by this young woman. Now, why did they bring that up? Two reasons. Where did the tribe of Judah come from? I'm sorry, in this case, of Perez. I'm sorry, Judah from Perez. And how did it become legitimate? Levirate marriage. All right, so this is being connected in the text. The other is the house of Israel was built by Rachel and Leah. What would the house of Yahweh be built if we're going to sort of move forward through the house of Elimelech? Are there any other houses to be built? In that sense, it was the metaphor of a house, that is the people. But we're going to see, in that sense, when they pronounce this blessing, we're going to see when we see who comes from this marriage. This significance of a house being built by Yahweh, this house of Israel, it may be hinting to exactly what God has appointed the Davidic king to build. Verse 13, so Boaz took Ruth and she became his wife, and he went into her. See, I think that's the phrase that's when they consummated their vows, and that's when, in God's provision of redemption for Elimelech, but now a wife for Boaz, it is consummated, and Yahweh granted her conception, and she gave birth to a son. What's the significance of that? Does the house of Elimelech now, does it die? Does the land now go to another? No. Now the land, this is the son who is going to stand in the place of Chilion. This is the grandson of Elimelech, and it came through Boaz's marriage to Ruth. Yahweh granted her conception, and she gave birth to a son. Then the women said to Naomi, blessed is Yahweh who has not left you without a kinsman redeemer today, and may his name be proclaimed to Israel. May he also be to you a restorer of your soul and a sustainer of your old age, for your daughter-in-law who loves you and is better to you than 7 sons has given birth to him. Now, significantly here, I think we kind of feel the reverberations of Genesis chapter 3, verse 15. Indeed, woman brings forth the seed. And in the seed there comes salvation. And so too that they were saying that it was the daughter-in-law of Naomi. She is the one who loves Naomi. She gave birth to this son who gives life. Verse 16, then Naomi took the child and put him on her bosom and became his nurse. The neighbor women gave him a name, saying, a son has been born to Naomi, so they named him Obed. Now we see the significance. What follows now gives us the significance, and this is the only place in the Hebrew Bible where a genealogy ends the book. Obed, we are told, is the father of Jesse. Jesse is the father of David. Now, when was this written? Or when did these events take place? Not when it was written. In the time of the judges. Was there a king in the time of the judges? No, there were judges. They judged Israel. This is explaining when the circumstances do not allow for one to see how is God going to bring forth his promises. God is actually, through circumstances that seem as if they are bitter and are impossible for him to fulfill his covenant promises. In fact, what God is doing through those circumstances is bringing about the fulfillment of those promises. That's how David came to be. And then connecting us, this is one of the 3 10-member genealogies in the Hebrew Bible. We now get the connection from the generations of Perez down to the father of David. Now, these are the generations of Perez. Perez became the father of Hezron. Hezron became the father of Ram. Ram became the father of Amminadab. Amminadab became the father of Nahshon. And Nahshon became the father of Salma. And Salma became the father of Boaz. And Boaz became the father of Obed. And Obed became the father of Jesse. And Jesse became the father of David. End of the book of Ruth. The other 10-person genealogies are in Genesis chapter 5, verses 1 through 32, connecting the line between Adam and Noah. The other is also in Genesis chapter 11, and there it connects Shem to Abraham. This 10-member genealogy now connects David's line. Adam, Abraham, David. And how did David come to be? Through circumstances that seemed like there was no way that the house of Elimelech could recover from the curse, that a seed could not be given, that the land could not be preserved. And yet God did exactly that by a redeemer taking a Gentile woman to be his wife. Nowhere else in the Old Testament is Ruth mentioned. But do you know where she is mentioned again in the Bible? Matthew 1, the genealogy of the son of Abraham, the son of David. Ruth is clearly David's great grandmother. She is, in that sense, one of the great grandmothers of the Messiah, Jesus. So one of the things we learn is that's how they were to understand in exile, now returned with no Davidic king. Is it hopeless? Is God unable to fulfill his promises? No. God is going to accomplish fulfilling his promises even through circumstances that you do not have the ability to see how he is keeping. And we can take from that and know, indeed, in our life too, we are not going to be able to understand how our present circumstances are being connected to God fulfilling his promises. But they are. And so the book of Ruth helps us to do that. Isn't that a great book? So there's technical questions you can come and ask me afterwards, but we end. We're not going to have class next week because of the demands that I will need to give to prepare for the weekend conference. So no Old Testament class next Wednesday. We'll resume the following week. Any questions? Thank you for your endurance. You can ask Tim about any of the details regarding uncovering his feet. Y'all are dismissed.
You're